Hello, everyone.
Are you able to put up the PowerPoint? Are you able to share the PowerPoint?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Are you able to share the PowerPoint I sent to you? Are you able to
reproduzir
the PowerPoint presentation? Yes.
Para você reproduzir o PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. I will put the PowerPoint here in. As soon as my computer comes back to life.
It's okay if you can't. I'll just go ahead and speak.
My computer, my personal computer, is famous here in PUC because he always let me down. But I will put your. Just one more minute. While my computer is working, I would like to thank everybody for be here because we are very honored and delighted with the presence of Professor Enyinna S. I beg him pardon for my lack of pronounce. But I'm very happy with his presence here. I knew Professor Nwauche when I started making my research on law and development. He is the author of a very important article that I use in the master degree here in my classes. This is part of our main bibliography, and because of this study on his research. There was a kind of serendipity. I was able to come to Professor Nwauche and start what I hope to come to be even more strength relationship between our university and between our research. I've been studying and I've been learning a lot from his research, and that's why I invited him. And he thanks a lot, Professor, because you accept our invitation to talk for our law program here in Campinas, Brazil. And it's a pleasure. It's well, my computer finally open. I will share the screen with everybody with his slides. And Professor, Professor Nwauche is Professor of Constitutional Law in South Africa in the University of Hare in East London. And he came here virtually to Brazil to present a talk on the challenge of religious principles in adjudication, Ubuntu and the South African judiciary. I thank you, and the word is yours, Professor. I will share the screen as soon as my computer can, but the word is yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Delighted to be here, Professor, for welcoming me. I today would like to share with you some thoughts about a meta-norm, a cultural religious ethic, a principle, a value of African traditional religion that has a religious origin but has migrated to become a cultural value. And I thought it was a good example to use in exploring the manner in which liberal democracies address the use of religious principles in adjudication. I'm looking at the way that judicial officers employ religious principles in deciding whether a legislation is valid, whether it is constitutional, in reaching decisions between litigants who come before that court. As I said earlier, the reason why this is fascinating is the question whether it is better for a legal system to discard the use of religious principles, or whether that legal system is better off framing religious principles as cultural principles. In every country where there is the freedom of religion, many faithful members of different religions would always like their ideas of the common good to be the basis of how society is organized and promoted, as it were. But you have this challenge where there is the instinctive reaction of legal systems that religious principles are not fit for use in adjudication. And before I get to that, I would like to provide an outline of what I would do, simple outline. I'm in the introductory part of the lecture. I will speak about religion and law in South Africa, move to discuss religious principles in adjudication, concentrate on Ubuntu as a cultural religious ethic, and then conclude. And of course, a context of religion and the state in South Africa is important because it frames the dilemma, the challenges that South Africa, like most liberal democracies, face in determining whether religious principles, religious values should be used in adjudication. South Africa is widely regarded as a secular state. Thank you. That's the thing. Professor, could you go to slide 3? I think that's where we are now. Okay, I think I'm taking control now. I can move it. Okay, here we are. Forgive me for just stepping back a little, but this is just an introduction of the lecture, as it were, that I had already discussed. And the aim of the lecture is the enormously complex and difficult problem of the use of religious principles in adjudication. And it is complex and difficult because many liberal states pretend that religious principles are not used in adjudication for reasons that we would deal with in just a couple of minutes. Many of our laws are rooted in religious traditions, Christian, Islamic, and other religions. And that challenge that South Africa faces is that it is ambivalent on the influence of religion on law generally and the challenge of using religious principles in adjudication. Ambivalent in the sense that you do not get a clear sense that it is accepted or rejected. And the focus that I bring to this lecture is the narrative of how Ubuntu, which is an ethic of African traditional religion, has fared in adjudication in South Africa, but as a cultural ethic rather than a principle rooted in African traditional religion. My argument, or part of my argument, is that this manner of development from a religious to a cultural ethic is not surprising, given South Africa's unique position. But it should raise concerns of a difficult understanding of religion in public life. Our usual, perhaps many legal systems instinctively think that religion should be consigned to the private sphere, and that in public life, religion should have no play, no role. And because of that, of course, many of us, if you allow me to digress, are quite familiar with the American popular principle of the separation of church and state. But even in the United States of America, there is an incomplete separation because religion continues to play a role in state. Can I have the next slide, please? Good. My background to the lecture, as it were, is to put out these facts to present a context for the arguments and the points that become clear later. South Africa is widely regarded as a secular state, and being secular is widely understood as being neutral to all religions, rather than the absence of religion from public life. The challenge, of course, in the mere general statement that religion is part of public life is to interrogate exactly what that means for adjudication. What does it mean for religion to be part of public life? Does it mean that judicial officers are free to take any religious principle as a basis of adjudication, deciding disputes between parties, deciding on the constitutionality of legislation, deciding on the validity of actions of public officers, deciding on contracts, private agreements, civil wrong? How does the judicial officer act? If I were, for example, even amongst Christians, if I were of a particular religious denomination, should I use as a judicial officer my learning, teaching, and beliefs to judge, reach a decision or in a matter between the state and a Muslim or a member of another sect? And so, as I said earlier, this is an enormously complex issue. Part of what makes this also complex in South Africa is that there is a freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion that is protected as part of the Constitution in the Bill of Rights. So invariably, if you, as a liberal state, would like to protect the right to freedom of religion, it means that you must, in deciding the claims of a citizen that his or her rights to freedom of religion or his or her religious freedom has been abused, have to deal with religious principles. Many liberal democracies, many judiciaries follow the principle of non-entanglement. Courts do not want to judge the sincerity of religions. They don't want to get into dogma because of the obvious difficulty of a court deciding that a particular religious belief or practice is valid or invalid. But even at that, they continuously do that. But for South Africa, it means that questions of the freedom of religion become inexorably part of what courts do. My engagement today does not really track that. What I really bothered about is whether a court, irrespective of whether citizens have sought to advance their religious freedom, would enter into the realm of religious principles to bring out the principle or to use a principle as the basis of solving or deciding a matter before that court. Another complex facet of religion and the state in South Africa is that South Africa's religious demography is diverse. Even though Christianity is the dominant tradition, there are many denominations, and the syncretic one at that is African traditional religion, where many South Africans bestride the African traditional religion and then Christianity. Of course, there are many denominations that are dominant in South Africa. There are also other minority religions, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, and Hinduism. And why this is important, as you can imagine, is the question of how a judge decides which of these religious principles that he or she should use. Is it by training? Is it by faith? Is it by upbringing that the judge decides to use one religious principle as against the other? And what I've done here is to try to set out in an overview the general arguments against the use of religious principles in adjudication. Again, as a context in looking at how South African judiciary has responded, whether these principles have become what they've used or ignored. And of course, one of the first arguments is that a judicial officer should not use religious values or principles because it's not accessible to all. It's not something everybody in society, since people are of different faith. The choice of one faith necessarily excludes others. And the religious values advance subjective views of the common good of those who are members of that sect. It becomes a little difficult to stretch that to become the common good of all. And the third argument is that when a state is secular, which has become the tradition of modern liberal states, and that neutrality should mean that a state should walk away from using any religious value as a basis of ordering its public life. And of course, that means that judges should not use the values and principles of a particular religion in reaching decisions. Fourthly, religious values are stated because they are of dogma, that they are not open for debate. So there's no conversation, which is always important, or public debate as to how principles develop. And why should any society use such religious values when they're not open for debate? Secular values, if you put that, are open for debate. So they out of public reason, they develop, they change, because people argue in a rational and irrational manner, and consensus is formed, and new ideas grow on old ideas. But religion is full of dogma that is even fortified by tradition, and that becomes difficult. If you bring that to public life, it means we cannot argue, debate, and change them. And then, of course, if a religious value is part of the religious convictions of the adjudicating officer, it becomes even more difficult. So two Muslims appear before a Christian, and if you allow me to use that example, and the Christian decides that Christian values should be the point of adjudication of a matter that is expected by the two Muslims to be Islamic law, as it were. I'm not going to try and rebut these arguments, but I put it in context. I put it also out there to show how the predominant view in liberal democracies is that religious principles should not be used in adjudication. And as I said earlier, there's ambivalence towards religious principles in adjudication in South African the legal system. And judges have, in many cases, referred to religious principles in litigation. They refer to the Bible, to the Quran, to the holy books of Judaism, Hinduism, in different forms. Could you go back to the slide 5, please? Okay. Here we are. We're slide 6 now. And one of the many examples that a state like South Africa, because it protects the right to freedom of religion as a human right, is that religious principles must come in freedom of religion litigation. I've highlighted the issue of corporal punishment. And a couple of years ago, a decade or two ago, the South African Constitutional Court was confronted with claims by Christian parents who argued that a legislation of the South African Parliament that excluded corporal punishment in schools was against their right to freedom of religion, and that they wanted an exemption in schools, in Christian schools. that exemption would permit them to allow corporal punishment to be used in those schools. Of course, the South African Constitutional Court struck down that request. And that's the point I made earlier. Where there is freedom of religion litigation, religious principles become a matter of course. A court cannot refuse to deal with a request by a litigant who seeks to advance his or her belief or practice. A court must engage with determining whether the particular action is an abuse of religious freedom. There are cases where South African courts have refused to use religious principles in adjudication. One of those cases is a case that litigated the recognition of same-sex marriages in South Africa. And I'd like to read what the court said, because the argument made by those opposed to the recognition of same-sex marriage was that this recognition would be contrary to long-held Christian traditions, and that it would breach the religious freedom of many South Africans. And the court, refused to follow this argument and made this statement, which I'm sure you do see here. It is one thing for the court to acknowledge the important role that religion plays in our public life. It is quite another to use religious doctrine as a source for interpreting the Constitution. It would be out of order to employ religious sentiments of some as a guide for the constitutional rights of others. And yes, there is support for religious principles in adjudication. And a key part of that support is support from the present Chief Justice of South Africa, who has linked Ubuntu, which is the subject of our discussion, to biblical principles. And again, reading from the quote, Ubuntu gives expression to, among others, a biblical injunction that one should do unto others as he or she would have them do unto him or her. The law, order, generosity, peace, and common decency that previously characterized many communities in South Africa were attributed to an unwavering commitment to the philosophy of Ubuntu. So South Africa is ambivalent. On one hand, we support the use of religious principles, and yet on the other hand, there is judicial dicta that rejects such an approach. And I thought that was a good context to now, look at what Ubuntu means generally as a cultural and religious ethic. And simply means a Zulu maxim, which is found in many of the over 10 to 15 different groups in South Africa in different forms, and also across Southern Africa, and indeed many African countries. And I'm sure many of us who are listening can identify this ethic in their community. It's not strange, it's not something extraordinary. It's something that every community, in my opinion, carries along. It's an inherent part of communal life. And that the maximum Ubuntu, it says a person is a person to other persons. And my summary is that it's an ethic that promotes solidarity, reconciliation, civility, responsibility, compassion, warmth, understanding, caring, sharing, humanness, dignity. And a further conclusion that it has become a meta norm that has been used to correct injustices resulting from the abstract principles and rules of South African Constitution and the legal system. One of the interesting things about Ubuntu being of a religious origin is that, and part of African traditional religion, is because of ancestor veneration. African traditional religion has one of its many precepts that ancestors are sacred, and the argument is that if you are to become one person, if you become a person through other persons, it includes becoming a person through ancestors, and the ancestors are regarded as the head of the African moral order. In spite of this origin, it has become clear in the past 2 or 3 decades that Ubuntu has been conceived as a cultural value and its religious origin or context forgotten or neglected. And that was the reason why I thought this was a subject of our reflection. And as I said earlier too, it has become the most important development of post-apartheid jurisprudence in South Africa. It's touched all aspects of law, South African law, public, private, constitutional. It's still in development. It started from the South African Constitutional Court. And my argument is that given South Africa's horrible past and enduring legacy of its history, the rise of Ubuntu was and is still important. If there was no metronome like Ubuntu, it would have been invented. And I come to the last part of my lecture, which is to reflect on religious principles and the use of the way South African judiciary has used Ubuntu. And you get a sense that there are widespread difficulties and abuse of the use of religious principles in adjudication. One of the difficulties is to decide exactly how and which principle that you use. Secondly, there is a predominance of Christian principles as religious principles for the reason that Christianity is the dominant religion in South Africa. And so when discussions continue or abound of the use of Christian principles or religious principles in adjudication, what is really spoken or unspoken is the Christian principles. And then, of course, if you go down further, you ask the question, which Christian principle are we talking about? Roman Catholic? Are you talking about the Protestant, the Anglican, the Presbyterian, as it were? There are also reflections on the lessons of religious or cultural values and religious principles. One of the reasons why this is fascinating to me is that it will appear that Ubuntu has survived in South Africa because it has been framed as a cultural value. And the difficulty and challenge of that is that we inexorably are working towards excluding religious values from adjudication. And I think that is principally wrong. There must be a way in which we understand that certain religious principles are crucial for adjudication in the way we form our ideas of the common good. And that must continue to remain on the table. Even if it is difficult to decide on which of those principles, it cannot negate the fact that in principle it is good to have that possibility. If a secular state means a state in which the state is neutral to all religions, and therefore a state in which religion is crucial in public life, it cannot be possible that it shouldn't be possible, or it shouldn't be the only way forward that religious principles morph into cultural values to be able to survive scrutiny in the public square. Maybe one of the crucial points about Ubuntu is the way it began its journey from the South African Constitutional Court. So that could be a lesson. Apex courts of the highest order in many jurisdictions, might do the legal system a service by being the ones who engage in this conversation, so that their authority as a final court becomes the precedent that courts, other judges need to be able to use the religious principle. The lesson of Ubuntu and its journey from the South African Constitutional Court is the way it emerged at the beginning of the post-apartheid South African legal system, where it was used in a case that involved the death penalty. And then, of course, the authority of the South African Constitutional Court has always impacted on the way in which it has developed. And very often, there is an extension of that principle in one area of the law. And that trickles down to other courts who now see from the apex court that this is something worth doing, and begin to, of course, follow the precedent of the apex court. That said, the challenge, which of course we all have to deal with, is what do you do as a guide? How do officers, judicial officers, how are they to be guided? We should be able to identify proper and improper uses of religious values. Should a court, in trying to use religious principles, invite other religious groups to comment before her, before the court, on a principle that is being used? Many of us, of course, know that there are many commonalities in the values of many religions, and that might not be a difficult thing, but as a process, a court of law, an apex court that engages in wide consultations, might find the consensus and legitimacy to use a principle where there are commonalities amongst different religions. And then, of course, if a judicial officer is minded to use judicial principle or to use religious principles, that judicial officer might do well to disclose his or her religious bias as a means of encrusting legitimacy on the principles, religious principles that are used in adjudication. Let me end by thanking you, but confessing that I hope I asked more questions that I'm able to answer. I have no pretense that I have complete answers to this very complex issue, but I think it's something that legal systems shy away from and hide, and yet all too many modern liberal states, either that are Christian in origin or Islamic in origin, religion remains a key issue, forming culture, determining adjudicatory principles, and even those principles that are secular are always religious in origin and in refinement. I think this is a good place to end, and then I hope I am able to answer some of the questions that emerge from here. Thank you very much.
Professor Nwauche, I'm delighted. Thanks a lot for your talk. I would like, if you don't mind, to give opportunity now for Professor Douglas Barros to make to raise some points for discussion. But before I send him the word, just to prove that I was paying attention and trying to make connections with my research. Two or three things for just raising some points. Maybe Douglas could tell about these points. John Rawls is a famous philosopher of law with his seminal article, Justice as Fairness. Can we talk about justice as Ubuntu? I don't know. And in slide 9, you said that there are wide consultations with religious groups on issues before courts. Is Ubuntu subject of deliberation by religious groups as amicus curiae at the appellation courts? Just to raise some points, but Douglas, I made a terrible. I apologize for my bad behavior. The word is yours. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Josué. Thank you. Well, thank you, Professor Nwauche. Thank you a lot for the University for Hare, to be in contact with you. It's a pleasure to me, and for us from PUC-Campinas to be in contact with a colleague that is researching so important problems, and so interesting problems in terms of religious involvement or religious relation with political problems and political public space. So my background, I'm a philosopher, so I studied philosophy in graduate course, undergrad and graduate course. and postgraduate, and I did a postdoctorate studying the problem of sovereignty and the relation between sovereignty and religion. So the conflicts of religion and politicians and public context is a big issue to me. So I'm very interested in this kind of questions and problems that you has mentioned before. So I think we are in front of a big issue. So when we talk about the relation between religion and public space and public problems, we are in front of a very big, important issue. Why I'm saying that? The problem is very complex, and the problem of adjudication is a problem that has another level of complexity. Because here in Brazil, adjudication is, we have an image of the judge when he is adjudicating some problems. He is a species of, is an impartial judge. Because our image of the judge when he is working over the problems, over the process, he is impartial. Whole the adjudication related to religion is, for me, it sounds to me very problematic. Why I'm doing that? Why I'm saying that? Because religion, and so the Christian religion, the Christianism, is a religion that is thinks on the structure of society and the problems of society from a very how can I say that, very specific point of view. So to me, when the Christian judge is related with religion in the context of adjudication, my question is, and I'm doing this question, how can the judge be and act as a free judge, as a professional that's thinking freely about the process that he is studying or he is judging. And because why I'm saying that? Because it's very difficult to say the religions are neutral. So the neutrality of religions in the public context is a big issue, as I was told it to you, and I'm very interested in know about your conception of pluralism. And I am saying that because the pluralism presupposes the different conceptions. They are discussing in the public context, and any conception is over the other's conceptions. Any vision of world, vision of life, vision of morality can to be overacting or sobrepondo, se over staying over the other conceptions. So what and how do you understand the pluralism, the religious pluralism in the context of Africa? Why I'm saying that? Because in Brazil, we are not so like state. The laicism and the laicity of the state in Brazil is not so clear. The Brazilian constitution has a very ambiguous conception of laicity. So in Brazil, for example, the public space has religious images. We are working in a religious university is very, very common. I understand why we have in our classes, in your ambience, different ambience, images of Jesus Christ and saints and things like that. But the public space, why the public space should have religious images? So in Brazil, it's very, very common that. So the main space in our Supreme Court has an image of Jesus Christ. So in our traditional religions are not so the Christianism. So we have a very important tradition that comes from Africa, and religiosity coming from indigenous traditional religions. And that's why I'm very interested in Ubuntu. Ubuntu seems to me very, very interesting because it's a kind of religiosity or religion. I don't know how can I say that. It's better to say religion or religiosity. A very mixed and very is a kind of melting pot of religions. And to me, Ubuntu seems something like the opposite of individualism. And it's very interesting in how the Ubuntu can to inspire the education in South Africa. How the Ubuntu as a melting pot of religiosity, African religiosity, can be this neutral or a mix of different traditions and different points of view. And my interest is to know about when you say about the Christianism has some kind of predominance about over the other religions. So you said that the Christianism is more predominant, but in the education, the Christianism is prevalent, is predominant too. And another question to me is the Ubuntu should be open or could be open for other traditions that are not coming from Africa. So the Latin American tradition, religious traditions, the Ubuntu could be see these traditions like something interesting or related with these traditions. Our Indian, Brazilian traditional religions or our African traditional religions could be related to this Ubuntu, very, very open to different traditions. So these are the questions, just a couple of questions that your exposition are inspiring to me. Thank you a lot for your exposition. You are working with a very big challenge, and thank you for so interesting questions. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can respond before we take another set of questions.
Please open your camera.
Yes, very much so. Here we are. Thank you. One of the questions asked was whether Ubuntu is justice, and the simple answer is yes. The conception of Ubuntu is one of justice. Of course, we often have different conceptions of justice, but when you have a meta-norm that speaks to fairness, solidarity, reconciliation, civility, dignity, humanness, you are working towards justice. And two questions that have more like one is whether Ubuntu is open to other religious and cultural traditions. And the question is yes. If you look at how it has developed, what South African courts have done is to use an aspect of Ubuntu, humanness, dignity, solidarity, reconciliation, and develop legal principles from that and as a basis of what they do. So I think that Ubuntu is open to all traditions. Can it be a melting point? It is very possible that it can be a melting point, but because of time, I didn't want to get into quite a lot of objections to the use of Ubuntu in South Africa. From what you will understand as it's being very vague, not very precise. It's been something that can be used against individual autonomy and human rights. Because if you talk about solidarity as a feature of Ubuntu, there's been quite a lot of argument that enhances the capacity of groups to abuse children and women, because patriarchal rules are often justified on the basis of solidarity and communal good. And those criticisms are, in my opinion, valid. But one way to understand it is to think of Ubuntu as a metanorm, as a value that enables a court to be able to use virtually any tradition as a basis, because you find the same issues of civility, love, reconciliation in every religious tradition. It's not common to Southern Africa, but it is something that every tradition has. So yes, it's open to being influenced. And the challenge, or one of the reasons why this is fascinating, is again, the manner in which it has developed as a cultural value rather than as a religious value. It seems to me that if it had developed as and continues to be regarded as a religious value, there will be very serious objections to the use of Ubuntu for the reasons I've outlined. And so what is fascinating here is that this is a religious value in a sense that has become a cultural narrative which appears more acceptable to everybody because it's not religious. And again, one of the reasons is that if you frame Ubuntu as a value of African traditional religion in a country like South Africa where Christianity is dominant, you would have issues with many Christians believing that this should not occur because it is against a predominant religion. Obviously, of course, Christians would like biblical principles to be dominant in a country that is Christian. One of the things I brought out was the Chief Justice along these lines of this ambivalence and coherence is the Chief Justice of South Africa, tracing Ubuntu to biblical principles. So in order to, in my own opinion, and I could be far-fetched, but in order to weld Ubuntu to a Christian foundation and make it, in a sense, more appealing to the dominant Christian tradition, the Chief Justice of South Africa says Ubuntu has biblical principles. Is he correct? Yes. As I said earlier, you can find in every religious tradition the things that Ubuntu speaks about. There is no religion in the world that does not speak of reconciliation, love, humanness, solidarity, civility, dignity. Every religious tradition in the world speaks to this common, universal ethics, as it were. But for a Christian nation, it struck me as crucial that the Chief Justice welds Ubuntu to a biblical principle, because it's a conversation that the court, the highest court of South Africa, wants to put out there to the general public and says to them, this is a cultural value that has religious connotation. The reason why I raise it is not to object to what the Chief Justice has done, but to bring out the fact that we cannot run away from religious principles being part of our public life. But the challenge, which I have no answer, is how do you do that? How do you make this transition? And that is the challenge we all have. How do you manufacture this, or how do you take these religious principles of a sect? It doesn't have to be Christians. It could be Muslims. How do you, in a country that is predominantly Christian, how do you find a principle of a minority sect and bring it to the center of public life? How do you manage that without being a riot, without there being a civil war, as it were? And that is the challenge that I thought it was important to discuss. And so you ask questions from judicial officers, how do you do that? How does a court manage that huge translation of values from a minority religious into the center of the public life? And then that has meaning, because perhaps there might be different practices of minority religions that might help solve the problems of most of our countries. Rules that are particular in different areas, but which are shut out because they are minority religious rules. And if you interrogate and look at them closely, you're able to translate these rules into the center of public life, and that countries may benefit in that respect. So that is my short answer to that. So thank you, Professor, for your reflections. It's a difficult problem, you know. Please do not imagine that I have the answer. I cannot answer the questions you raised.
To me too, it's a big issue.
It's a big question. It's not something that is easily resolved.
Thank you a lot. I really appreciate your talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much too. Yes.
You don't have the answers yet, Professor.
I don't have the answers yet. I wish I did, but I'm thinking about them, and and I just hope that get everybody to think too.
Yeah. Professor Douglas, do you have any other points or any other remarks? I have another here, but please, the word is yours.
Could you read the João Paulo Gomes has a very good question. Could you read the question for Professor Nwauche?
There's a student here in our master degree, Professor Nwauche, João Paulo Massa. He wrote
I can see the question. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Okay. I can see. If I read it, Professor, I've seen some researchers arguing that Ubuntu has a close relation to restorative justice practices, usually sharing some common characteristics with it. Would you have some considerations on the matter? Also, do you think that Ubuntu practices in South Africa could provide new ideas for the implementation of restorative justice practices throughout the world? Yes, there is. To both questions, yes, there is. Restorative justice is a crucial part of the way Ubuntu has developed in South Africa. So the simple answer to that question is many ideas about Ubuntu. Of course, you know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, for example, in South Africa, was a crucial part of the restoration of the fabric of public life in South Africa. The questions of addressing poverty, exclusion, the questions of addressing injustices and restoring different aspects of the fabric of South African life is still incomplete. And there are many people who think that Ubuntu is not being used enough by South African courts to restore South Africa from its apartheid past to a country that is based on freedom, dignity, and love, if you like the use of that word. So the answer is yes. So you see South African courts in different aspects, in looking out for the dignity of ordinary South Africans, in looking out for the socioeconomic rights of ordinary South Africans, be it access to food, water, income, health. Ubuntu is always a metanorm where courts who are deficient in finding legal principles fall back to Ubuntu and use it as a closing argument, because the South African legal system does not address some of the ills of capitalism, if you like. So when faced with difficult issues, Ubuntu becomes a metanorm by which courts go back and say, oh, well, Ubuntu preaches restorative justice, and therefore we take a decision against this rule based on that fact. So thank you for that question, and that's my answer to that.
Professor Nwauche, I have another question after this explanation. Ubuntu as a metanorm seems a very proper metanorm for South Africa. Here in Brazil, we have, or in Western world, we have as the main metanorm the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Human rights, at least here in our Supreme Court, is used as a metanorm to express how to apply, how to adjudicate the legal system. This rule should be applied in accordance with the human rights. You have fundamental rights, or this right should be yours because it can be interpreted in accordance with the human rights. Now you present Ubuntu as a human right that maybe fits better. And have you made any discussions or any comparison between these other metanorm in our Western world and Ubuntu?
Yes.
I expressed myself clear. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. Excellent. Absolutely. Very good question. There is a Bill of Rights in South Africa. So human rights is also a metanorm. And the challenge South Africa faced is the content of the rights, as you well know. Rights are declared in very short, prescriptive language. Everybody has the right to life. And then you begin the process in the journey of a nation in determining what life means. And what Ubuntu has done is that it has helped infuse content into different human rights, because the challenge, as you know, of rights is to find the content. What does it mean to say everybody has the right to health? And you know, there are different conceptions of how far a state should go, for example, in providing health to its citizens. And so what Ubuntu has done is to aid the conception of the common good that the different human rights have. So a South African court that is confronted with a claim of access to a particular human right, that is unable to find, in a sense, precedent in already decided decisions as to whether a claim fits into a right, often draws Ubuntu out from the back as a means of heading towards recognizing claims of human rights. And so therefore, it is not in conflict with human rights, but in a sense, complementary. And as I said earlier, there are many who argue that in a liberal state like South Africa, where, of course, the idea of human rights is tied into individual self-worth and dignity, Ubuntu that preaches solidarity could be a tool in fostering group solidarity, which itself oppresses or could be used as an oppression against other groups or vulnerable persons within that groups, like women or children or minorities. So that criticism is valid in a sense. And so what has happened over the years is that, for example, the idea of dignity as a means of self-worth or as an expression of self-worth is been tied to Ubuntu, because when you say a person is a person through others, it not only highlights solidarity, it also highlights the individualism of that person who is to be a person, because that person must be a person that is conceived as free, autonomous, and of the same worth as other persons. So the traditions of Ubuntu are not without challenge. You must know it's not. There are different conceptions that come up, and of course, there's a debate as to what is acceptable to South African courts. So that conversation appears in judgments, because when a court reaches a decision using Ubuntu, it continues the conversation because it expands, it puts out a particular conception of what Ubuntu is. And that conversation continues in academic writing and other decisions. One good example is contracts between individuals and the strict liberal understanding of pacta sunt servanda. Contract should be interpreted clearly. What you write in a contract should be simple means of interpreting the contract, because it assumes that as freedom of contract, that those who contract are free to reach terms, and that once those terms are reached, a court should give meaning to the terms reached by individuals as autonomous beings. But Ubuntu has been used to bring substantive equality into the way contracts. An insurance company and an individual certainly do not have equal bargaining power. So if you interpret an insurance contract in the strict sense, usually the insured is often the one who bears the brunt, because when you sign an insurance company, you're desperate and you don't read the terms and all that. So that particular example has been one in which South African courts have brought in substantive ideas of fairness in the interpretation of a contract. So you're supposed to tell an insurance company that you had a loss in 12 days and you don't. South African courts would say, well, if you did it in 15 days with explanations, we should recognize that you have not breached your insurance contract. This is just a small example, but this is the way it has worked across both public and private law, where South African courts run into issues that are difficult because of the way the system, Roman Dutch law, interprets and English common law interprets it. They reach into the bag and say, oh, well, but this is a country founded on Ubuntu. We are asked to use Ubuntu as a means of guiding public life. And if we use Ubuntu, we'll talk about fairness. And if we say fairness, we should not be able to interpret this contract strictly. We should give meaning to the individuals who have formed this contract. They are ordinary South Africans who are not literate. They can't be regarded as having equal bargaining power with the insurance company.
Okay. Is there anyone, any questions, any remarks? Hello? Douglas would like to...
Please, if you feel like reaching me through my email, I'd really love to continue the conversations offline. As we engage in this, please feel free to get in contact if you can.
I will share your email address to everybody here. It's very kind. Thanks a lot for sharing the email to everybody. I will make a copy paste here afterwards, and everybody will have your contact for further investigations. Thanks. I appreciate very much. Thanks a lot, and hope this to be the first of many exchanges we may have in the near future. I learned a lot from Ubuntu about this meta norm, and maybe it could be used in comparison with Brazil. It's something that we could apply in our tradition here in Brazil. We have a syncretism. We have religion as a way to understand things, and we could learn this meta norm. We could maybe we could apply this here in our studies too.
That would be nice. Thank you.
No, thank you too. No, anything else?
Thank you, Professor. It was very good to hear from you and to us and for my group of research, because here in Brazil, in our university, we work in groups of research. I have my own group of research, and Josué has the other group of research. So we think to make closer to our research and to make in contact for share our conceptions of the involvement of religion in public space. Yeah. So I study political theology, and this kind of subject that you mentioned before is very interesting to me. So thank you a lot, and we will be in contact.
Thank you very much. I look forward to that.
Thank you.
Professor Nwauche, any closing remarks?
Okay, thank you very much. Very much. I really enjoyed the lecture, and thank you very much. I look forward to more collaboration, more talk, and I have a couple of ideas which I will share in due course as to how we can continue the collaboration in the coming year. So I'll be in touch too.
We are going to be in touch. This is for sure. Professor Nwauche, thanks a lot. I appreciate the audience of everybody from the groups of research by Douglas, students from and professors from my group of study. And this will be recorded. This is recorded. This will be broadcast by PUC. We are going to put this in the YouTube and the timeline of our Facebook page, and I hope that everybody have access to this fabulous talk by Professor Nwauche there in South Africa, University of Hare in East London. Professor Nwauche, thanks very much for being here with us, and hope to see you this summer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye. Bye-bye. Yeah.
No recording. Thanks a lot. Bye.